Amina's heart pounded as she raced across the busy Lagos street, her swollen belly barely allowing her to move quickly. Amidst the hustle, she spotted an old man gasping for breath, choking on a piece of food, his face turning purple. Without thinking, she lunged forward, performed a quick Heimlich maneuver, and saved his life. What Amina didn't know was that this chance encounter would set off a chain of events that would expose a hidden world, transform her life, and reveal the shocking truth. The man she saved was the father of a billionaire CEO, and their worlds were about to collide in ways she couldn't even imagine. Amina had always considered herself a fighter. Life in Lagos, with its ceaseless noise, chaos, and smog, had shaped her into someone who never gave up, even when it felt like the whole city was against her. She was a street vendor, selling roasted plantains from her makeshift stall near the bustling market. The world around her moved fast, but she had learned to survive in its cracks. Her stall was a humble spot, barely big enough for her to stand behind, but it had become her sanctuary. At 28, Amina was pregnant with her first child. Each day, as the sun beat down on her, she could feel the weight of her unborn baby pressing against her, reminding her that her struggles were only just beginning. The past few months had been a blur of aching feet, long hours, and the constant worry that the baby inside her wouldn't have a better future than she had. Her dreams, once vibrant and full of promise, now felt like distant stars. She had lost both her parents in a car accident when she was young, and from that moment, the street had been both her home and her enemy. Despite the odds, Amina kept a hopeful spirit. She was known for her kindness, often sharing her food with the elderly and children who wandered by, sometimes without a naira to spare. It was in these moments, small acts of compassion, that Amina felt closest to the person she wished to be, someone who could make a difference. But everything changed one afternoon, as she wiped the sweat from her brow and tried to prepare her next batch of dodo. An old man, struggling for breath, collapsed just a few feet away from her stall. Without thinking, Amina rushed to his side, ready to help. What she didn't realize was that this man, who seemed so ordinary, would soon reveal a world that was far beyond her own. Amina's hands trembled as she knelt beside the old man who had collapsed in front of her stall. The heat of the Lagos sun beat down mercilessly, and for a moment, the world seemed to shrink, leaving only the man's distressed gasps and her frantic thoughts. He was an elderly man, perhaps in his 70s, dressed in a faded white shirt that had seen better days. His face, once full of life, was now contorted in pain, his lips turning blue as he struggled for air. Amina's instincts kicked in immediately. She had watched enough YouTube videos on first aid to know what to do. She grabbed his shoulders, her swollen belly making it difficult to bend, and forcefully pressed her hands into his back. His body jerked, a violent cough, and then a deep breath. The old man exhaled heavily, his breath shaky, but he was alive. Amina's heart was still racing, and she could feel the beads of sweat forming on her forehead as she quickly sat him up. "Are you okay, sir?" Amina asked, her voice low but filled with concern. She hadn't realized it yet, but her simple act of kindness was about to trigger a series of events that would turn her world upside down. The man stared at her for a long moment, his eyes wide and grateful. Then, with an unsteady hand, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled card. "Thank you," he rasped, pressing the card into her palm. "I'll never forget this, my daughter." Amina blinked in confusion, staring at the card. It was an ordinary business card, slightly worn at the edges, with a sleek logo on the front that she didn't recognize. "It's no trouble at all, sir. I'm just happy you're okay," Amina said, trying to hand the card back. But the man shook his head weakly. "No, you saved me. You don't know who I am, but this will mean something someday. My son, he's a powerful man. He will want to thank you for this." Amina was bewildered. Powerful? What could this old man mean? She had seen so many people struggle on these streets, men and women who lived lives just like hers, scraping by day to day. But something about his words struck her. Her mind raced, but she didn't have time to ponder it further. The man, still gasping for breath, managed a weak smile before slumping against the stall, his body growing heavier in her arms. Before she could react further, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The tinted windows rolled down, and a well-dressed young man leaned out. Amina's heart skipped a beat. He looked like he belonged in a different world entirely, a world she had no part of. His suit was crisp, his face sharp and confident, and there was an aura about him that screamed success. "Dad, are you all right?" the young man called to the old man, his voice laced with concern. His gaze shifted toward Amina, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if measuring her in an instant. "I'm fine, son," the old man replied, his voice weak. "Just a bit of a scare." The young man's eyes locked on Amina now, and for the first time she felt something shift in the air. The weight of his gaze made her uneasy, but there was something about him that she couldn't place. Something familiar, yet completely foreign. The old man turned to Amina, his voice barely a whisper. "You don't understand, my son." He trailed off as the young man helped him into the car. Amina was left standing, holding the crumpled card in her hand, watching as the car drove away into the distance. Her heart was still pounding, her mind a whirl of confusion. What had just happened? Who was this man? And what did he mean by powerful? She stood there for a few more minutes, staring at the card in her hand. The card's logo was simple but elegant. The name, Seymour & Co., was printed in bold letters on the front, followed by an address in Victoria Island. But that didn't mean anything to Amina. She didn't know the first thing about high-powered businesses or CEOs. Yet, somehow, the encounter felt significant, too significant to just forget. She couldn't shake the image of the young man's eyes or the old man's cryptic words. Amina turned back to her stall, her thoughts racing, but something in her gut told her this wasn't the last time she would cross paths with them. The tension in her chest only grew as she wondered what lay ahead, and why she felt as though she had unwittingly stepped into a world far beyond her own. As the evening approached, the world of street vendors and busy markets seemed to fade into the background. Amina's thoughts lingered on the man, the business card, and the mysterious son. Who were they? What did they want with her? And why did she feel so inexplicably drawn into their lives? Unknowingly, Amina had just become part of a story much bigger than she could have ever imagined. The next few days felt like a blur for Amina. The scorching sun, the busy market, and the usual crowd of people haggling over dodo, it all seemed distant now, overshadowed by the mysterious encounter with the old man and the cryptic words he had whispered. She couldn't stop thinking about him, nor could she ignore the weight of the card in her pocket. It was a simple thing, just a business card, but something about it gnawed at her. Her curiosity gnawed at her too. She found herself staring at the card during slow moments, wondering about Seymour & Co. and whether it really meant anything. The name meant nothing to her, but the way the young man had looked at her, the concern in his eyes when he'd seen his father choking, it all seemed strange. Why had he come in such an expensive car as if his father was royalty? And why had the old man specifically told her his son was powerful? Amina shook her head, trying to focus on her stall, but her thoughts kept slipping back to them. Then came the unexpected call. Amina was balancing a tray of grilled plantains when her phone rang. She glanced at the number. It was unfamiliar. A brief moment of hesitation washed over her before she answered. "Hello? Amina?" A deep, commanding voice on the other end caught her off guard. "This is Maxwell Seymour. I'm calling on behalf of my father, Mr. Seymour." Amina's breath caught in her throat. Maxwell Seymour. The name sent a chill down her spine. She immediately thought of the young man from the car. This can't be real. "Yes, this is Amina. How can I help you?" "I'd like to invite you to dinner," Maxwell said, his tone calm but firm. "It's important. We need to discuss the events of last week." Dinner? She had no idea what to expect. Was this some kind of prank? But his voice, so serious, made her think twice. She glanced over her shoulder at her stall, the familiar smell of roasting plantains filling the air. Could she leave all this behind, even for a night? Maxwell's voice cut through her thoughts. "We can send a car for you. A simple thank you for your kindness to my father." Amina hesitated. "I don't know. I didn't do anything special, just helped an old man." You saved his life, Amina, he replied, his voice softer now, almost as though he understood the struggle in her words. And that's more than you realize. Please, I insist. She didn't know what was happening, but something in his voice stirred a mixture of anxiety and anticipation in her. She agreed, reluctantly. There was something in the back of her mind telling her that this dinner would not be just a thank you. That evening, a sleek black car pulled up to her stall, and Amina couldn't help but feel a sharp sense of unease. The car's polished exterior gleamed in the dimming light of the Lagos streets. A driver in a dark suit opened the door for her. The drive to the upscale restaurant in Victoria Island was quick but silent, leaving Amina to her swirling thoughts. Her mind raced, imagining every possibility. What was she about to walk into? What did Maxwell Seymour want with her? When the car finally stopped, Amina stepped out onto the cobblestone driveway of a high-rise building. The restaurant was more magnificent than anything she had ever seen. The glass doors slid open automatically as she entered, and the soft hum of jazz music drifted through the air. She felt out of place, standing in the marble lobby, surrounded by polished furniture and impeccable decor. Maxwell was waiting for her by the elevator, standing tall in a crisp, tailored suit. His eyes were dark, assessing, but when he saw her, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "Amina," he greeted, extending his hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." "Thank you for inviting me," Amina said, trying to steady her nerves. "But I'm still not sure why I'm here." Maxwell gestured toward a private dining room, his expression unreadable. "Please come. Dinner will explain everything." As Amina followed him, the sense of unease only grew stronger. The air in the room seemed to hum with tension. They sat, and as the waiter served them, Maxwell began to speak, his tone casual but with an underlying sharpness. "You saved my father's life last week, Amina. We don't forget acts like that, especially when they come from someone with such an interesting background." Amina's chest tightened. "What do you mean by that?" Maxwell leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. "My father may seem like just another old man on the street, but he's been involved in some very important matters. You've crossed paths with people who are connected to more than you think." Amina swallowed hard. "I don't understand." Maxwell's lips curled into a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's simple. You didn't just help an old man, Amina. You helped someone who has ties to some very influential people. My father is a man who knows things, sees things others cannot, and when you saved him, you unknowingly placed yourself in the center of a situation that could change everything." Amina felt a shiver run down her spine. Her gut told her this wasn't just a thank you dinner. She had stepped into a world much bigger than the busy streets of Lagos, and she didn't know whether she was ready for it. But before she could ask more, Maxwell continued, "The real question now is whether you're willing to accept the consequences of your actions. What happens next is in your hands." Amina sat in stunned silence as Maxwell's words hung in the air. "The real question now is whether you're willing to accept the consequences of your actions." The weight of his statement hit her hard, sinking into her chest like a stone. What consequences? She was just a street vendor, a woman trying to survive in the chaos of Lagos. She didn't ask for any of this. She didn't want to be dragged into some hidden world of power and influence. But the truth was, she already was. Maxwell's eyes never left hers, sharp and calculating, as if he was waiting for her to respond, to make some kind of decision. Amina opened her mouth to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. She had no idea what to say. "I'm not a part of your world, Maxwell," Amina finally managed to say, her voice trembling slightly. "I just helped an old man because it was the right thing to do. I didn't think there would be any consequences." Maxwell leaned forward, his demeanor shifting slightly. His usual coldness softened just a touch, and there was something in his gaze that seemed almost apologetic. "I understand, Amina, you didn't ask for this. But sometimes in this world, doing the right thing can pull you into situations that you don't expect. People like my father and me, we operate in ways you can't even imagine. There's power, and then there's influence, and they don't mix well with innocence." Amina clenched her fists in her lap, trying to hold back the rush of emotions that were building inside her. This is too much. I'm just a poor, pregnant woman trying to make a living, and now they expect me to understand their world? The injustice of it all overwhelmed her. Why me, she whispered, her voice raw. Why didn't you just leave me alone? Why drag me into all this? Maxwell was silent for a long moment. The soft clinking of cutlery against porcelain plates filled the void, but Amina barely registered it. She felt as though she were drowning in a sea of questions with no answers. Her heart raced, and she could hear the pounding in her ears. Then Maxwell finally spoke, his voice low and filled with a hint of something that might have been regret. Because you showed my father something that no one else has shown him in years. Kindness. You treated him as a human being, not a means to an end, not a commodity to be bought or sold. You saw him for who he truly is. Amina's breath hitched as she realized what he meant. All this time, she had assumed the old man was just another struggling soul in the city. She had never thought of him as anything more than someone she could help, someone who needed a bit of compassion. But to Maxwell and his father, that simple act had somehow meant everything. But that's not enough, Amina said bitterly. You think kindness can change everything? You think it can fix all the damage that's been done to this city, to people like me? Maxwell's eyes softened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folder. He slid it across the table toward her. Amina hesitated before opening it. Inside were pictures, photos of her street stall, of her standing by the road selling plantains, of her laughing with the children who frequented her stall. But there were other photos too, darker ones. Images of men in suits watching her from the shadows, of cars trailing her movements, of figures she didn't recognize following her every step. What is this? Amina gasped, her stomach churning with fear. These are people who have been watching you, Maxwell said quietly, his tone now serious. My father isn't just some old man on the streets. He's a key player in a much larger game. You saved his life, Amina, but now you're caught in a web of dangerous people who know everything about you. Amina recoiled as if slapped. What are you talking about? What do these people want from me? Maxwell's face remained emotionless, but his voice was firm. They want to control everything. They'll use your kindness against you, and they won't hesitate to hurt you to get what they want. And now, you're tangled in their plans. It's not just about what you did for my father. It's about how they will use you, whether you want to be used or not. Amina's world seemed to tilt on its axis. She had never asked for this life, never wanted any of this power or manipulation. She had only wanted to be left alone, to live her life as simply as she could. But now it felt like the universe was forcing her into a corner. Maxwell leaned back, watching her closely. You're already in this, Amina, and the only way out is to make a choice. You can stay on the sidelines, but that won't protect you. Or you can step up and take control. The game is bigger than you can imagine, and it's about to get dangerous. There's no going back. Amina's hands shook as she gripped the edges of the folder, the reality of what Maxwell was saying crashing down on her. She was trapped, not just by the street, not just by the pregnancy, but by forces she couldn't control. She had no choice but to make a decision. But what was she supposed to do? How could she fight when she hadn't even known the rules of the game? Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, refusing to show weakness. She was stronger than that, wasn't she? But as she stared at Maxwell, at the pictures in her hands, she felt a cold dread settle deep in her bones. The game had already begun, and she was a player whether she wanted to be or not. The days following the dinner felt like a blur of confusion and dread. Amina couldn't shake the weight of Maxwell's words, nor could she forget the pictures, the silent watchers, the men in suits who had been tracking her every move. She had never asked for this life, and yet here she was, entangled in a web of power and influence far beyond her comprehension. Each time she tried to push the thoughts away, they crept back, gnawing at her. The weight of the choices she now faced was suffocating. She couldn't go back to her old life, not now. The photographs haunted her, and each time she left her stall, she felt eyes on her. She had become a pawn in a game that she didn't understand. It was one thing to help someone in need, but another to be dragged into a situation where the stakes were so much higher than she had ever imagined. She had never been naive about the harshness of life in Lagos, but this felt like something else entirely. Her days became consumed with fear. Every passing car seemed like a potential threat. The shadowy figures in the pictures were everywhere. She couldn't walk to the market without glancing over her shoulder, expecting someone to jump out and drag her into the dark world Maxwell had warned her about. There was no escape, no safe place. It was as if the moment she saved that old man's life, her fate had been sealed. And yet, even amidst the fear, there was something else stirring within her, a fire that she hadn't realized was there. It was faint at first, but it grew over time. Amina had always been a fighter. She had fought to survive as an orphan, fought to make a life for herself on the streets of Lagos. She couldn't allow herself to be a victim now, not when her baby's future was at stake. The turning point came late one evening, just as Amina was about to close her stall for the night. A sleek black car pulled up in front of her, the engine purring in the still air. She froze. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the driver. It was one of Maxwell's men. He stepped out of the car with a purposeful stride and walked toward her stall. "I need to talk to you," the man said, his voice cold, his eyes steely. Amina's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run, to flee, but her legs felt like they were glued to the ground. She glanced around the street, hoping someone would intervene, but the busy market was emptying out. It was just her and the stranger now. "I'm listening," Amina said, forcing her voice to remain steady. The man didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Maxwell wants to meet with you again. He says it's urgent. You've been involved in something much bigger than you realize." Amina narrowed her eyes. "I'm not interested in meeting him again." The man's lips twisted into a slight smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't have a choice. You're already in this. People are watching. It's too late to back out now." Amina's chest tightened, and for a moment, she felt like the walls were closing in. She had been hoping, praying even, that this would all go away, that she could return to her simple life. But it wasn't that easy. She tried to calm her racing thoughts, forcing herself to focus. "What does Maxwell want from me?" "He wants you to come to a meeting," the man said, his tone now more insistent. "This isn't a request, it's an order." Her mind raced. She was trapped. She knew it. There was no escaping this world, not anymore. But there was something else in the air, a feeling that she could no longer ignore. This wasn't just about survival, it was about taking control. Amina had spent so much of her life being pushed around, being powerless. But this was different. She wasn't going to let someone else dictate her fate. "I'll meet him," Amina said, her voice low but firm. "But I won't be a pawn anymore. I won't let anyone control me or my life. Not now, not ever." The man's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something almost like respect in his eyes. He nodded, though his smile remained thin and empty. "We'll see about that." As he turned to leave, Amina's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was clear. She had just taken the first step toward reclaiming her life. She was done being afraid. She was done being a passive player in someone else's game. That night, as she lay awake in her tiny apartment, her hand resting on her belly, Amina knew that she had crossed a line. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in days, she felt a sense of clarity. The next time she met Maxwell, she wouldn't be a victim. She would be someone who made her own choices. The world had already tried to trap her. Now it was time for her to fight back. The decision had been made. There was no turning back now. The meeting with Maxwell was set for the following evening. Amina had never felt so torn in her life. Every part of her screamed to stay away, to protect her child and herself from this dangerous game. But deep down, she knew that avoiding Maxwell and the forces behind him would only prolong her helplessness. She had to face them, to step into the world she had been pulled into, and to fight back in whatever way she could. When the black car arrived again, she didn't hesitate. She climbed into the back seat with a steady, almost defiant calmness, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. The driver didn't speak, his face hidden behind tinted windows, but Amina felt his eyes on her, as if he could sense her determination. The car sped through the streets of Lagos, and for the first time in a long while, Amina didn't feel like a passive observer. She wasn't just being swept along by events anymore. She was about to make a decision that would shape her future. The destination was an upscale penthouse in Victoria Island. Maxwell's office, she assumed, but it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that this time, she wasn't walking in as a pawn. She was walking in as someone who had control over her own fate. Maxwell was waiting for her in a lavishly furnished room, his usual cold demeanor softened, but not gone. He looked at her with something akin to curiosity, as if he wasn't sure what to expect. Amina noticed his eyes dart to her swollen belly, but there was no judgment, no derision. Instead, his gaze lingered, almost with a touch of understanding. "Amina," he greeted her, standing up as she entered. "I'm glad you decided to come." "I didn't come here to be your pawn, Maxwell," Amina said, her voice unwavering. She was no longer the scared, confused woman she had been when she first encountered him. This was her moment, the moment when everything would change. Maxwell's brow furrowed slightly, and he gestured for her to sit. "I'm not asking you to be a pawn. I'm giving you a choice. You've already seen how this world works. The people behind all this, they can hurt you, your baby, everything you care about. But you have the power to change that. You can be part of something bigger. You can be protected." Amina's gaze hardened. "I don't want to be protected, Maxwell. I want to be free. I want to live my life. I'm not some tool for your father or for anyone else. And if it means going up against the people you're working with, then so be it." Maxwell's eyes narrowed, but there was something almost impressed in his expression. He knew this was no longer about money or influence. It was about control, about the power of making choices in a world that constantly stripped others of that power. "You don't know what you're up against," he warned. "This isn't a fight you can win. People like me, we don't just back down." Amina's voice dropped to a whisper, but it was filled with the kind of resolve that only came from knowing she had nothing left to lose. "Maybe I don't have the power you have, Maxwell, but I have something stronger than that. I have my heart, my courage, and the will to protect the one person who matters most, my child." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them grew thick with the weight of their unspoken understanding. Maxwell had underestimated her. He had thought she would be a weak link, just another pawn to control. But Amina wasn't the same woman who had stood on that street corner, unsure of her place in the world. She had found her strength, not in the power of money or connections, but in the fierce, unyielding love she had for her unborn child. "Then we're at a crossroads, Amina," Maxwell said, his voice low, almost resigned. "I'm offering you a way out of all of this. You can walk away, safe and secure, and live the life you've always wanted. But if you choose this path, the one where you fight, well, you'll never go back, and neither will I." Amina's eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, she saw the truth in his words. This wasn't just about him or his father. This was about her. It was about her ability to choose. She wasn't the same frightened woman who had stumbled into this world. She had realized something essential, that her choices, no matter how small or insignificant they seemed, had the power to change everything. A deep breath filled her lungs, and with it came a sense of finality. "I won't be controlled anymore, Maxwell. I'll fight. I'll fight for my freedom, for my future, for my baby, and I won't back down." Maxwell studied her for a long time as if trying to gauge the sincerity of her words. Finally, he nodded. "You've made your choice. But remember this, Amina. In this world, there are no easy paths, no guarantees. If you choose to fight, you'll face enemies you can't even begin to imagine, but you will also have the power to create your own future." Amina's heart thundered in her chest as she stood, every inch of her body radiating a new kind of energy. The path ahead was unclear, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but she no longer feared it. She had found the strength within herself to confront the darkness. It was time to take control. She turned toward the door, her back straight, her mind clear. "I'm ready," she said quietly, her voice a quiet promise to herself. "Let's begin." The transformation was complete. Amina had stepped into her power, and she wasn't going to let anything or anyone take it from her again. The days following her confrontation with Maxwell were a whirlwind, but for the first time in weeks, Amina felt a sense of clarity settle over her. The fear and uncertainty that had clouded her mind had been replaced by something stronger: resolve. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, fraught with danger and obstacles, but she no longer felt small. No longer was she a passive player in someone else's game. She had taken control, and that was something no one could take away from her. Maxwell had kept his word. He didn't force her into anything she wasn't ready for. Instead, he provided the resources she needed, a network of people who could help her navigate the undercurrents of power that flowed just beneath the surface of Lagos's wealthy elite. But Amina's path was her own, and she walked it with purpose, with the fierce determination to protect her child and carve out a future free from the shadows that had once threatened to consume her. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings and strategizing, Amina found herself standing on the small balcony of her modest apartment, staring out over the sprawling city of Lagos. The lights twinkled below her, but they no longer seemed as distant or unreachable. She had found her place in this world, not as a victim, but as a survivor. A woman who had risen from the depths of poverty and fear to become something more, something that was capable of changing her destiny. She rested her hand on her growing belly, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to her unborn child. "I promise you, we're going to be okay." As she stood there watching the sun dip below the horizon, Amina knew her journey was far from over, but the difference now was that she wasn't walking alone. She had her own power, her own voice, and for the first time she felt truly free.